Hi, I'm Graham. I'm a golfer who's passionate about technology and also a caddy in the north coast of Ireland. Me and my team are on a journey to create an app for the golf caddying industry, and while we're at it, we want to speak to as many interesting people creating exciting projects within the golf industry. I believe the future of this game is bright, my friends, and this is the Future of Golf podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Future of Golf podcast. This is episode number 8 where we are joined by Jake, who is working late this evening, and he is the CTO at YourGolfBooking, which is a company that's revolutionizing the way that driving ranges make money. Jake, I appreciate it. You're still grinding away in the office there, and I appreciate you joining me late. How are you?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I only put these things on the whiteboard to look like I'm doing something really.
It looks like there's a method to a madness behind you there.
I don't. If you've ever watched the film 23 with Jim Carrey, where there's pen all over his face, that's pretty much me on a late night working. So yeah, don't try and make sense of it.
What would your usual working day be like? Would it be quite flexible, or when would you start and stop usually?
Probably 7 days a week and 7 a.m. till probably 10 p.m. a lot of the time. That is, I think, how it goes when you're running a startup. But yeah, flexible, we'll call it.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that. There's a lot of early mornings and late nights and some crazy working hours as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess this all originated from me chatting to Ian Blunt of In Range Golf.
Mhm.
And actually have an experience of using your product in I think it was the Greenwich driving range that I booked.
Sure.
So it's funny how this all worked out, and I just filmed a podcast with Ian. We're gonna maybe go over it tomorrow. We had a few technical difficulties, but yeah, I guess going back to the start of the journey. So before the podcast, you mentioned that you're only really at it sort of about a year. So do you want to maybe take me back to prior to that moment when you started working in the technology and where this all sort of came about from?
Sure. So, I mean, my background was interestingly never golf. So I ran a software dev agency for sort of the last sort of 4 or 5 years. And as part of doing that, we picked up a contract piece basically to build a booking system for Greenwich. So the Greenwich Peninsula driving range is a bit of a monster of a driving range. I mean, last year I think it was 18 million balls. I mean, it's a crazy venue in terms of the volume that it gets and how busy it is. But that is kind of what you get when you build a 60 bay entertainment range, and it's right in front of Canary Wharf. So you're sat there hitting balls out towards the Thames. It's a really nice spot. But that venue had a lot of pains just because of how busy it was and no real good way to run it.
Mm-hmm.
So us as a dev agency, through a friend I knew from university, we ended up talking to Declan, the owner, and building him a platform to better run Greenwich. So it was half the bookings, which is the
Mm-hmm.
first problem because the booking system they had just couldn't cope with the volume and couldn't cope with
Yeah.
all these people like oversubscribing, trying to buy the same slot and getting all these conflicts. And then also the management side, because they had no real way. At the time, they were using Google Sheets, and they were really just with this shared spreadsheet at reception, trying to book people in. At the same time, getting emails from the booking system telling them that
Yeah.
someone had booked, and trying to, while they've got queues out the door, trying to reconcile these two things, and it's just absolute chaos.
Yeah, I could just
And
imagine some poor admin sitting there getting bombarded with emails and
well,
phone
it
calls.
was three poor admins that were sat there getting
Uh,
bombarded, and they were getting bombarded because, I mean, like I said, they operate at a ridiculous volume.
mhm.
And we, at the time, kind of came up with this idea of the product being sold at that driving range, where rather than just selling baskets of balls, you would sell a period of time and a basket of balls, or just a period of time and not care about the balls.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how we base the system. But sorry, to backtrack to your question, we so I ran a dev agency. We had this contract piece. We built that. I can't remember the exact time we built it, but we worked on it probably for about 18 months to get it right. And it went
Mhm.
through loads and loads of iterations. And
Yeah.
once we finally got it right, it really, really worked. And Greenwich's online turnover at the time was about 700 grand for the year, and now they're sort of 350 or upwards a month, and it's that something worked, and we really sort of grabbed onto the idea that this was the future of how to do it. And we talked to Declan, who he owned a few other venues, like sort of further up country, not quite the same scale as Greenwich, but kind of, varying sizes. And he just basically said, could we do it with my other venues? And I'm like, well, I think we could go one step further. I think there's a business doing this. So we actually then went into business with Declan. So
Amazing.
YGB now is part owned by myself and part owned by Declan. So it's half techie and then half golf pro.
Yeah. Yeah, you need both sides of it. You need some guy in the sales and growth side, and then obviously yourself building the essential software behind it. And it's funny you mentioned that it was also like a very custom job that you did for that driving
Yes.
range. So I got speaking to, I don't know if you've heard of BRS. They'd be
Yeah,
like a
very
key
well, yeah.
booking system. So I got speaking to the founder of BRS a while ago, a fantastic guy, Rory. And he mentioned that his first product in I think it was 2003 or four, span out of him solving a problem for a golf club in Northern Ireland. It's called Beaver Park. It's up near Belfast, which would be the capital of here. And it literally was just like a custom one-off job, and
Yeah.
then was like, hold on a minute, there actually is, I can scale this with a few more clubs, and eventually it went on to be sold to Golf Now. For God knows how much. So it was very much you solving a pain point for one customer that ended up being, hold on,
Yes.
we've now got a business out of it.
Well, look, you've got to prove that it works, haven't you? And I mean, the best way to do that
Yeah.
is a real life use case. And then Greenwich has been a great like flagship venue for us. It's, if everyone ever asks, oh, can it cope with our venue? We've got a really busy venue, and they go, well, here you go, have a look.
Exactly. And I suppose maybe for people that are just going to a driving range at the minute and just rocking up and hoping they have a bay, I guess what is the inherent advantage of using a system like YourGolfBooking to go ahead and make your bookings?
So I mean, like for me, so I'm a golfer now as well, right? So I wasn't a golfer until we really started this whole journey, and I've since really gotten into it. And we use our local range quite a lot, and it's a nice bay, it's a nice setup. It's 30 bays. There's no tracking or anything, unfortunately. The guy's quite anti-tech, but
Mm-hmm.
that for us it's like you're driving there and you're thinking, I hope there's some space. I hope I'm not queuing.
Yeah.
And I hate that feeling when you're in a bay hitting balls and there's like a few people behind you waiting.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
It's like pressure.
you know what? I don't think it's even the pressure. It's just the fact that like, oh, well, someone wants me to leave.
Yeah,
And I find
exactly.
it really hard to focus on my game if I know there's someone behind me wanting me to get out.
It's like a restaurant where you've sat down and you've just got your
Yeah.
steak and you see a queue out the door and you're like, flip, my table's going to be grabbed up here.
But I just like, and I mean, I'm a fairly busy person, and I don't really want to be going to play golf not knowing if I'm going to be waiting half an hour. Like that's really really irritating. So for me, what I would want is visibility, and that's I think where it's really worked. And I think the reason that venues like Greenwich and others make so much more money just by putting the system in is honestly because customers can tell when it's busy and when it's not. And if you're going to want to go and play or hit some balls, maybe it's like an entertainment range like Greenwich, and really you just want a thing to do of a night out. You've actually got some flexibility about when you can do it. Now you can't actually only play between the hours of 6 and 7. You can play probably between the hours of 5 and 10. So if you go and look at a venue and at a glance you see that the range is completely full, you go, well, I'll click forwards a bit and I'll try that time later. So what happens is rather than having 1 hour where everyone turns up, half the people get disappointed and half of those people don't come back because they got disappointed, you instead have everyone turns up, everyone gets to play that wants to play. Your peak hour has become like a peak 6 hours because actually people book either side of when they originally intended, and suddenly you make a hell of a lot more money and you've got a hell of a lot more repeat customers, and it just works. It's like it's better for everyone.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the revenue growth of Greenwich there, and then it seeming a very sensible business model to then be applied in a more broader scale. I think it's actually a very interesting time that you guys have accelerated this during a
Mm.
pandemic, and I think there's a lot of booking systems that have emerged for different industries during this due to the convenience or maybe not being able to meet with a large crowd of people. Do you
Yeah.
think the pandemic has almost accelerated your progress?
Oh, we know it has. We've got the numbers on on
Yeah.
whether it has. It definitely did. And to be honest, golf in general, as we all know, had a massive hit. Right, golf was great. Um, it was the only thing you could do and still be socially distanced. And I'll be honest, like driving ranges are a pretty low risk activity you can go and do. even if you're going with friends, you're in a separate stall, you're 2 meters at least away from each other with a barrier half the time in between you as well. It's a good thing to do when you're worried about social distancing. But yeah,
Yeah.
it definitely helped us. I mean, we were fortunate in that we started doing it just before the pandemic hit. So it was already in place and it was already a mature platform by that point. So we got a huge, huge step up.
Yeah, I suppose the great thing is, we in the UK had a break of being able to go on the golf course, but driving ranges, I mean, they were closed for a little while, but maybe not as quite as badly affected. So was
Yeah.
there a period there where you actually weren't live and you were sort of just working behind the scenes and things?
Yeah, but then the other benefit of that is that we enable pre-bookings then for venues as well. So what happened is that while it was all closed, everyone pre-booked. So Greenwich
Yeah,
like reopened to being fully booked for the next 3 weeks because
yeah,
everyone was just gagging to do something.
that's
So
it.
there's silver linings to everything. But yeah, we used that time obviously to build and improve, and we obviously had some growing pains we had to deal with because so many venues onboarded so quickly. So we had to really scale things up.
Hmm.
And it was actually quite nice to have that space to do it. But yeah, the
Yeah,
pre-bookings were a big thing, and we onboarded a lot of venues in that time when everything was closed because they were all saying, well, I wish we could be getting some revenue now for the bookings we're going to be having later. I'm like, well, yeah, you
yeah.
can.
Cash is king, absolutely.
Yeah,
Um, I, yeah, I mean, from maybe only using your product once just to book the Greenwich driving range when I was over in London, it seemed a fairly seamless user experience. You could click on and just see the ranges that were available. I think there was like a little graphic actually that showed you like nearly like a bird's eye view of
yeah.
the driving ranges, and you can just click and see which slots are available. Um, I suppose looking on the other side, maybe like stuff that In Range or Top Golf are doing. What do you make of that? The whole like gamatization of the driving range.
So that is massive. I mean, I think that's the reason that golf is growing so fast as well. It's that I mean, places like Greenwich are mostly non-golfers. But
Yeah,
even now, you're getting these sort of small country venues and little driving ranges that are putting things like Top Tracer in, and suddenly they're becoming a local entertainment venue without even really, necessarily intending to be. And,
yeah,
and that's great because suddenly it's accessible. I think indoor has done a lot for that as well because, again, there's indoor venues popping up where suddenly you've got an entertainment space that's related to golf, and it's great for getting people into it. It can only be positive. And I mean, we are integrated with most of those guys as well for things like the tracking systems. So again, it tries to make that whole seamless process. Like with the in-range venues, when you make a booking, you get given your PIN to log into your in-range bay, and you get given your barcode to get your balls out the dispenser. So when you're thinking about the non-golfers that are coming to do this, for them, they're not used to a lot of this process. So having a
yeah,
thing that pops up on their phone that says, "Here's your thing that you hold up to get balls. Here's the thing that you put in the screen to play the games," and they go, "Ah, cool, sorted." And they walk up, they hold their phone up to the machine, they get their balls, they go to the bay, they log in, they know what they're doing, and it makes it easy for them and it makes it accessible.
yeah. Yeah, it seemed a pretty simple process as far as logging on, and actually using the system. And I suppose I was actually chatting to Ian about this in the previous podcast. I suppose there's sort of two different types of customers for the driving range that is sort of emerging now. So you have your
Practice and
guy that
play.
actually wants to go to practice and work in their game, and maybe someone that's more there for the entertainment side of it. So I guess what have you sort of witnessed in your project? Like, what's the size of each different size of customer, I guess?
I mean, it really depends on the venue and how they position themselves, because some of them will put Top Tracer in and they'll say, "Oh, Top Tracer's here because this is a great practice tool," and they really think of
Yeah.
themselves as an academy, or they think of themselves as a place to improve their game.
Hmm.
But I think really the venues are going to keep doing really, really well are the ones doing both because you have daytime trade, right? And daytime trade is, to fit the stereotype, predominantly is probably going to be people who are retired or have flexibility around their working time. And they're going to come during the day when everyone else is working, they're going to practice. During holiday times and weekends and evenings,
Hmm.
probably if you've got that entertainment set up, the majority of your customers are not going to be there to practice. They're
Yeah.
going to be there because they want an entertainment system, or they might be there as a bit of both. It might be someone that's into golf that thought, you know what, there's actually some games here. I'll bring my friends who aren't into golf and I'll get them into it. And it's hard to say what the split is because I think it's so dependent on the venue. Greenwich
Mm.
is probably, in the evenings is probably 90% non-golfers. It's very similar to a top golf venue, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the other end of the spectrum where you've got these smaller venues. We've got a few venues on the system that don't have, tracking or games. They just want an elegant way to run the bookings, and run the range. And for them, it's a practice tool. And they've got all their tuition options and things on there as well. I think one of the things that was quite interesting that we did is the second stage of making a booking on YGB is your player selection. So no one was really doing this, and we wanted to know how many people were playing, because that's a big part of it. If you're playing in a group, you're not practicing. So,
Exactly. Yeah. You'll have one guy that brings out the driver, and then you're just in this long drive competition for the next 100 balls.
well, this is it. And you're there playing, aren't you, really?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so putting that player selection was a big part of it. And actually, that was an interesting one because we added something where you could charge per head as well for the bays. So that was quite new. No one was really doing that. So we thought, well, looking at Greenwich and looking at the numbers, we're seeing that the mean average number of players across the whole day was something like 1.9. Because you're getting the practices early in the day, and then you're getting the people who are coming in groups later. I'm like, well, if you charge £2 a head on the additional players, that's only £1 each on average per person. So they're not really going to mind. And if you include the first player, it's no more money for the single players that are playing. And adding on that £2 per head thing to Greenwich, I think took Greenwich's daily turnover up by something like £1,500 to £2,000 per day, and no drop in bookings at all. And we played around with the number, like worked out what was the best number, for the average booking size at the venue, to work out at what point can you push it to really where it starts to become not worth it. But people are remarkably honest about how many are coming to play, and it's just, again, it seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
You're
That's an
charging
interesting
experience,
little
charge per head.
test because, as you say, in different areas there might be different price sensitivity, so you can push
Yes.
it to a certain amount in Greenwich relative to maybe, I don't know, somewhere else who maybe be more opposed to that. I guess another thing I was curious as well. So, like, I guess the emergence of Top Golf has been a massive thing in America over. I'm not sure when that emerged. That was maybe 5 to 10 years ago when that started kicking off.
Hmm.
And I've had a few Americans in the podcast, and they almost say Top Golf is like a commodity over there. Like you can find one within 100 miles of wherever you go.
Yeah, there's about 60 or so of them, I think, in the States. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a hell of a lot more in the UK. Why do you think the UK has been slightly behind the adoption curve? And then where do you see it? Do you see them catching up within 5, 10, 15 years?
I'm sure they will build more Topgolf venues because I know the ones in the UK are profitable. I think as well that the UK and the US market is subtly different. And I think that I think that, I mean, my experience of the US market is minimal, really. So I'm really not the best person to ask on it. But the Topgolf model is really based around, while you're waiting, you go and do other stuff, like you have a drink, you buy food, and you linger around afterwards as well. And you don't really have the ability to book a Topgolf. You can reserve, but you can't actually book a time on a bay and know that you're going to have it, because their model is based around you extending your time. So I don't know if that model works as well in the UK as it does in the States. I think in the States, in the UK, we're probably more keen on knowing when we're doing something. We're more scheduled, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's just a subtle cultural difference. This
Hmm.
The British are more like, I'm here for 5, I'm out at 7, whereas the US are
Well,
like, you know what, staying for a few pints
I think
after.
I think we might plan our evenings a bit more, to be honest.
Oh,
Um,
the American audience will be
I don't
up in
know. It's
arms for
going to
that
be.
one.
I would love to hear people's interpretation of this, honestly, because I
Yeah.
think it's a really, really interesting one. It's hard to pick up what the subtle differences is. I know that Topgolf will do well in the UK anyway, and the venues that are here are doing well, and they're opening another one, aren't they, in Scotland at some point?
Very possible,
There
yeah.
was some talk about that I'd heard. So I know that they will do well, and I think that kind of thing can only be good for golf because
Hmm.
it's getting more people into it.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's the goal. Should be the goal of every technology, really, is to increase participation rates in the game. So ultimately that brings more eyeballs and more revenue eventually.
And I think, like you said about like making golf and making top, I say it's more like a commodity, right? And I kind of liken golf driving ranges now. I think sort of in a few years' time, we'll be thinking of them more like how we think of bowling alleys.
Do you know, it was so funny. Me and Ian, we sort of talked off the podcast as well, and we mentioned about the digitization of bowling alleys as like such a parallel to what will happen with driving ranges.
Yes, completely
And he
agree.
mentioned that bowling was almost going out of trend, and they thought like, how do we make this like, how do we target a bigger number of people to get them into the facilities? And yeah, I was bowling the other day actually, and they have, you know, your automated logins. You have the like funny facts coming up at the screen about your ball speed. It's just all these little engaging things to keep consumers interested that maybe just for the pure sport wouldn't be, you know.
Because I think it's also, I think it's sort of the leisure retail swap that's happening at the moment. I mean, again, I can only really speak for the UK, but from what we're seeing in like towns around where we're based in the south of England, a lot of these retail units are going empty. A lot of smaller retail shops are just closing outright. Even a lot of larger ones are closing a lot of their branches. And then what I think is going to be replacing a lot of them is leisure. And your shopping malls and things in the UK and the shopping centres, I think that a lot of those are going to be swapping out their retail units for leisure units. And there's been a lot of little emergences of sort of new entertainment based activities. Like the axe throwing is a great example,
Yeah.
right? It's just this thing that suddenly, I mean, I know it's been going for ages, but it's only really recently come to the spotlight and suddenly thinking, oh, this is great. You know, you can put a wooden pallet at the end of a hallway and you can throw axes at it and you can charge for the hour to do this. You know, this is great. And it's suddenly something better to do than just sitting in a bar or going to get some food. You know, you can't just fill these places up with F&B. You need to give people something to do. And I think indoor golf is going to be a big part of that. I think there's going to be probably the emergence of a few new different kinds of maybe sort of sports geared leisure activities. I know darts is another one. There's a lot of digital darts venues in the US where they keep
Wow,
score
I've
of the
not heard of
darts.
that.
So like the tracking systems that you'd see with a golf ball, you're getting with the darts.
Yeah.
And it's again, it's just something to have as an alternative to just going out for a drink or just going out for food. So I think
Yeah.
over the next 10 years, we're going to have a lot of turnover of retail venues into this kind of leisure venue. You know what, maybe 10 years down the line, it swaps back. But certainly over the next decade, I'm personally, I'm thinking there's going to be a lot more leisure. And I
Yeah.
think it's going to be based around things like golf, bowling, darts, the axe throwing. It's
Yeah.
all going to be that kind of trend.
And even that whole movement you're mentioning, nearly at the core of it was the pandemic, you know, this
Yes.
drive towards remote working, less traffic, less workspace usage, driving people out of town. So then we've got these empty buildings. What do we do with it?
Yeah.
We make them into facilities so your professionals can go into the city not to work but to actually enjoy themselves.
Well,
It's an interesting time.
if you got to think about, you know, what you can do in person versus what you can do at home. You know, golf, can you do it at home? Not really. Need a simulator. Can you play darts at home? Yeah, maybe if you've got a dartboard. But, you know, you need to have these things to do it. Shopping, you can do that at home. There's no reason you have to go into town for shopping.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people are kind of getting wind of that. There's no real necessity. There's other things you can do with these spaces that require you to be there. Again, eating, yeah, obviously you can cook your own meal at home, but if you want to go and eat out, you have to go out. You have to go to somewhere that's serving food. So, you know, leave the high street and leave all those places for stuff you have to go and do in person. They should be entertainment districts. I just feel like the retail is not the best use of them.
Yeah. And where is your team based at the minute? Where are you right now?
So we are in what was recently rated the worst town in the UK. We're in Aylesbury, in Buckinghamshire, which actually is not as bad as it's made up to be.
Yeah, actually, I have family. Well, they used to live in Buckinghamshire. They're in Scotland now. But yeah, I've been over there a few times. Yeah, the worst rated town. That's crazy.
It was a poll of not very many people, but everyone got wind of it, and it was all over a couple of the newspapers. So everyone was
Oh
very
my God,
proud, obviously, in town.
that's it. It's like yeah, pride thing, I would say. I, yeah, you mentioned that you were a massive golfer until recently. Was it sort of a correlation between getting into this product that sort of drew you into the game, or how would you get into it?
Yeah, it's definitely been because of this. I mean, I'm obviously I'm a techie, so for me, golf is an interesting one because golf is there's a lot of numbers, and it's the kind of thing that for me kind of clicks, I think, with what I like, which is this technical. There's a lot to learn around it. It's subtle in, you know, what makes a good and a bad golfer. And like I said, there's numbers and metrics and technology around it. And I would say it's probably one of the sports with the most accessible technology available. It's like you can't, if you wanted to, for example, if you're a professional footballer and you wanted all the metrics on, how you're kicking a ball, that's just not available. There's same. I mean, like I play squash as another sport that I've been into for a long time. Again, if you wanted like real data or real metrics on what it is you're doing, there's nothing. I mean, you could put on a smartwatch that would track, maybe your calorie burning, but you've got
Yeah.
you've got nothing really around that to support it. Whereas golf, there's loads of stuff.
Yeah. Why do you think that is, Jake? Why do you think it's so accessible to get data for golfers? Do you think it's the actual complexity of the sport that's driven that?
I think it is because it's also it's a sport where it happens quickly. Like you can't look with a bare eye at someone hitting a golf ball, and unless you really know what you're talking about, you can't say definitively what was good or bad about it because it all happened too fast. It's
Yeah.
also a massive market. I mean, it's got a huge number of people playing it in the UK and the US and throughout the world, and that number of people will obviously attract business to it. There's a market. But yeah, I think it's because it's very technical, things happen fast, and without being able to really analyze it, you can't get decent data out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose like even just thinking to how professionals are using the likes of TrackMan to coach amateurs, like maybe beforehand they would look at videotape and say, oh, your takeaway is too far inside, go fix this. Whereas now they can bring them facts of their swing path or their spin rate and say, listen, you're delivering the club in an efficient manner. We're going to change this because of the data. And it's almost made I would definitely not a professional myself, but having got golf lessons growing up, it's made that process and life easier for golf professionals because they can
Mhm.
turn to data instead of just opinion based coaching, I guess. Have you ever had lessons yourself in getting into the game?
Yeah, we've ended up getting lessons for the whole team. So we decided that if we're going to be a golf company, we had to learn how to play golf properly. Otherwise, we're just a bunch of phonies. So we've all been having lessons. We've got Dean Davis. If anyone knows him, he does a trick shots golf show.
I feel like
Who,
I've heard that name. Yeah,
yeah, he does quite a few of the golf shows, and he does private events as well. So Dean teaches up at the Oxfordshire, and that's
excellent,
where we're having lessons at the moment. But yeah, it's fascinating getting the data.
very good. And how are you getting on with it now? What have you got the handicap down to?
I think I've probably broken 20, which is
Good
good.
stuff.
Like I can actually play golf. I can go around a golf course. That's the main thing. The problem is we were getting invited to all these golf days, and like our payment processor that we're signing up with at the moment, our case handler's a really big golfer, and they invited us down to play the long cross. And I was sat there thinking, I mean, yeah, great, but I'm going to make a fool of myself. I better learn golf properly.
Yeah, it's handy for the networking events to have that skill of being able to put the
All the
club in the
business happens
ball.
on the golf course.
Exactly, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I suppose you're relatively still in probably the beginning of your journey relative to how big you could actually build this business.
Yeah.
So what's the main motivating factor for you to actually get into something like this? Like when you go into the office and you're working these long hours, like what's your driving force behind all your work?
I mean, I'm basically massive into problem solving. So I started the company really. I like making things. So my background was in graphic design and it was in programming. So early years I was a game developer for a long time, and again I like that because it's a lot of maths, a lot of problem solving, and I liked the issue with Greenwich because it presented a lot of challenges, and it was something where quite a few people had got it wrong, and it was clear that the solution wasn't an easy one. And the thing that I really like is coming up with a solution to those problems, and then seeing that being used by so many people is incredibly gratifying. And again, there's kind of a data aspect to it as well, because I like to see all these things happening and to know, oh, look, that's interesting, that trend, picking up things like charging per head and how much money that would add on average. That's the sort of thing where you get to drill down into the depths of this stuff. But yeah, I like this because it's solving a problem. There's definitely a gap. We've definitely got a solution. And for me now, it's really what motivates me is the fact that I know that a lot of the stuff we're building is very achievable and it's all happening quite fast. it's nice to see goals being reached quickly.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing in the world is having a massive project, but no interim goals, so no real way of sort of saying in the long term whether you're actually progressing or not. Whereas with this, we're releasing features all the time. Like we've brought out a point of sale system recently, to kind of tie everything together. We're building an academy management system at the moment. We've got hardware that we're going to be putting into venues as like kiosk style systems for booking in person. There's all these kind of interim projects. So it's kind of like a never ending source of new things to do and new challenges, which is why I'm really into it at the moment. And I think it's probably why I've gotten into the golf side as well, because it's all tying together and I want to understand the whole picture.
I think that's the exciting part for any team, or maybe anyone listening to this podcast. Whenever you actually see action being taken place and goals met, then there's something to get behind. Whereas if you're putting in all this work and there's no results, you're like, oh, where are we going with this?
And I've worked in big companies and corporates in the past, and the thing that's the most frustrating is not having that creative control and not being able to realize things that can be realized quickly. There are so many meetings in big corporates to get to very little progress. Whereas with us at the moment, if someone phones us up and says, oh, it would be really cool if you did this, and then next week we built it and gone, we agree, we built it. And that's really pleasing because you can, we get to design our own pipeline, we get to design our own flow. We can say, we're going to deploy weekly. We can build features and we can push them out, and we've got no one to tell us, no, you need to think about this a bit more. We can really just go ham on it. And that's what's so satisfying is all the progress that's being made and how quickly it's happening. We've definitely got a lot more agility, I think, than some of the competitors that we've got in that industry. And I think that's showing, and it's probably why we're onboarding so many venues at the moment.
And I would imagine people listening to the podcast, maybe they have a little side hustle in the golf game, whether it be equipment or maybe they're thinking of a new idea in the industry. If you had, I know there's so much involved with it, but if you had sort of like a core principle to live or die by when creating a product, like what would you say to someone at the very beginning of their journey?
I mean, for me, it's probably what I would tell kind of any new developer that I'd work with, which is that if you're going to build something, you build it properly and you don't take shortcuts early days. So much of what's made what we've got now good is because we spent a long time planning for what we wanted it to be. So I would say set the goal for what you want to get to and make sure that everything you're doing in the interim is going towards that goal. Because as soon as you start doing something that contradicts it, as soon as you start releasing something that, you think, well, I've kind of bodged this, or that'll do for now. As soon as you start doing that, you push yourself further away from the ultimate goal. So I would say, look at what it is you want to actually get to, and then make sure that every interim thing is also going towards that.
Yeah. Just to play devil's advocate, so if there's a scenario where, say, someone has this big, massive goal, whether it be I want to be the biggest golf fashion brand in Ireland, or I want to build this app for X industry, and maybe they have a 5-year vision, and 2 years down the line, they start getting feedback from their customers to say, we actually want something slightly different. Where do you draw the barrier then between changing your idea or sort of an iterative addition to what you're building? Where does that line draw?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is you should never get to the point, you should never be arrogant with your goals and arrogant to think that you've picked the right goal. Like, you can get things wrong, and I think failing fast is important. I mean, we had a lot of projects that we built before this that we thought, that might make a really, really great software as a service business, and ended up not becoming so. But I think the trick is realizing that early. So if it's obvious that what you're doing isn't working, you have to sit and realize that it might be wrong. And I mean, I think you keep yourself sane in situations like that, like I said, with those interim goals. So you have some greater goal, some top line, and you set your goals going towards that. If it so happens that you need to start shifting that, that end goal because obviously it's not right, then you do that, but you still have these interim things that you've achieved. And no doubt to get to the point to realize that, you must have already achieved something else. Like you don't get to the point where you suddenly have that clarity having not achieved anything, because if nothing else, you now at least know.
Yeah, it's not like a moment of realization. It's nearly like a slow slide of, oh crap, we're maybe going in the wrong direction.
But you've got to pick up on that slide early.
Exactly. Yeah.
And admit, if it's gone wrong, for God's sake, don't follow an idea into the abyss, because that is the way you screw yourself over, and that's the way you'll get to the point where you never want to do business again. If you take it that far, you have to realize early on, okay, that was bad, I was wrong, and never have the arrogance to think, no matter all the evidence is against me, I'll still carry on. That's a terrible thing to do.
Yeah, it's almost the balance between self-belief and self-realization, that you need to be so aware at every point of what's actually happening. And it's
the greatest people in the world get things wrong all the time.
Yeah,
it's just that they know it.
And I suppose for founders of products as well in the golf industry, maybe sometimes it's tough because it's your product and it's your thing you're growing. And I'm sure a lot of people maybe in golf or outside can relate to that. They almost go blindly to what they've created. But as you say, it's just being self-aware.
Yeah, I mean, as a developer, I'm definitely sort of victim to wanting to build something because I think, oh, that's really cool, I want to build that because it's cool. And then I have to kind of think, well, should we be building the thing because it's cool, or should we be building the thing because actually it works? It's just sense checking yourself really, and getting it in your head that you might be wrong. So you have to accept that fast.
Were you pulled in by the crypto trends that have been emerging?
I made a little bit of money on crypto. I will put that out there. But I again, it was one of those ones where, risk versus reward. Risk what you can afford to lose and nothing more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. And I suppose from golf at a macro level, is there anything that maybe frustrates you about golf that you would love to see changed in 30 or 40 years time?
Yeah, plenty. I would say. I mean, I've
what's the one biggest one? If you can nail it down, what's the pet peeve for Jack?
Too many people trying to give too many discounts, I think, as well, is one of the big ones. I think people have got it too far into their head that they have to discount their product to make sales, and that's just not the case. So there are loads and loads of places that try to sell top-ups and these like endless membership tiers that go on forever with all these different membership levels. Like I've seen someone do like bronze through to platinum memberships and just have some subtle difference between each one. And I just think, no, just sell your product. Like have something at a good price that people want to use and just sell that. If you want to do memberships and you want to go down that route, great. But again, make it worth it and don't complicate it. I wish people would stop trying to complicate all those products. Just sell something really simple. The most successful venues we have on the system sell like half an hour, 1 hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, 4 products, nothing else, and some top-ups. And they make the most revenue of anyone.
I guess the irony of having so many tiers is it almost separates your customer base then, because some feel that, because I can only afford this much, then I must be less worthy than these gold members, when in actual fact, they should all just be, I don't think it should be as separated.
So a great way to think about it is if you're going to go and paint your house and you went to B&Q to buy some paint, if there's 40 shades of blue, which shade of blue do you buy? Whereas if you just went to the shop knowing I need to paint my walls blue and there was 2 tins of blue or 1 tin of blue, you'd pick the tin of blue, and odds are you'd probably buy it because you're there to go and buy some blue paint. Absolutely. You're there to buy something, make it easy to buy it, don't overcomplicate it.
That's it. I was in London actually recently, and I went to a Flatiron, the steakhouse, and I think it was great. And the menu, it was literally just like steak, and there's like 2 or 3 side options. And I was like, I actually really like this because I can just go in. I know what I've came for. Like people have came here for steak, just like people going to the driving range have came here to hit a bunch of balls. We don't need infinite options. We just need what we came for and hit like those core principles.
Gordon Ramsay does his kitchen nightmares. The first thing he does is reduce the menu down to 6 items.
Isn't it? Yeah. Just be good at what you're doing, I guess.
And don't undervalue what you do. So many people come in and just think they have to give all these discounts. No, just make your offering really, really good. Sell it at a fair price. Don't try and offer all these discounts. Don't devalue it.
Absolutely. And I suppose if anyone wanted to find a bit more about YourGolfBooking, or maybe how they could avail of your service, where would they find you online, or how could they use your app?
So if you go on YourGolfBooking.com, it will take you at the moment to our little venue search page, and you can see some of the venues using the system. Like by all means, have a play around with it, go on to a couple of them and see how it works. And if ever you want to get in touch with us, just send us an email, hello@YourGolfBooking.com, And the way we work is we'll do a demo with you guys and tell you basically all about the system and how it would work for you.
Spot on. And is it mostly available in England at the minute, or is there facilities outside of England?
So we've got venues in the States, we've got venues in mainland Ireland and mainland Europe, and we've also got a few dots around in places like Abu Dhabi and all over the place. So there's no real limit on where it'll work, but the main customer base at the moment for us is in the UK.
Super. Thank you very much, Jake, for your time. That was really insightful and getting a very, very technical side of the golf industry. It's always interesting. No, it's good. As a non-technical founder myself, and you spoke very much in plain English as well, so that'll be a great listen for hopefully everyone that's joined along. But Jake, thanks for joining again. I appreciate your time.
Very welcome.
Thanks for watching the episode of this podcast. If you made it this far, you can continue the fun on Discord, our Twitter, and also subscribe to this YouTube channel.